The United States adversaries, including at a minimum Russia, China, Iran, and North Korea, have the capability to compromise U.S. election infrastructure.
Donald Trump delivered an emergency address to the nation and shocked Americans by admitting to interference in the internal affairs of the United States of America by Russia and China. Last night during prime time, Donald Trump came out of the East Room of the White House with a 25-minute address to the nation and said things that Americans still haven't recovered from it. He announced the declassification of intelligence documents in which Russia and China are officially named in black and white as adversaries of the United States of America. He accused Beijing of the largest theft of electoral data in history, namely 220 million files of American voters. Trump stated that the United States' own intelligence agencies are the deep state that for years hid from him and the American people information about how China and Russia stole the election from him personally. Well, overall, he says it is the intelligence agencies that run the so-called shadow government of the US. And Trump also demanded criminal cases against his own intelligence officers. But there's a catch, and I'll be very frank about it too. First of all, 2 out of the 3 main TV channels in the country refused to broadcast Trump's address. Trump's own intelligence assessment from his team in 2021 says exactly the opposite of what Trump himself said today. And the figure of 220 million stolen files is actually more than the total number of registered voters in America in 2020. So today we're going to break down this entire address. What exactly did Donald Trump say? Quoting him as much as possible, where he's right, where fact-checkers catch him red-handed, and most importantly, what all this means for America itself, for Europe, Ukraine, China, and Russia. My name is Alexei Pecci. Let's discuss these topics together. But before we start, I ask you to subscribe to this YouTube channel. We're approaching 300,000 subscribers. I would be grateful for your personal subscription.
That the United States adversaries, including at a minimum Russia, China, Iran, North Korea, as well as non-state groups, have the capability to compromise U.S. election infrastructure. End quote. But that's some statement, isn't it?
So, the day before, there was that much publicized major address by Donald Trump to the American nation. Trump started, as always, by praising himself. And I'll quote this part of his speech so you can feel the tone of the whole address. Quote, "Before we begin, I am proud to announce that our country is safer, stronger, and much richer than ever before. 2 years ago, our country was dead. Now we are the hottest country in the world." And then he goes on with a cascade of achievements. According to Trump, inflation has shown the largest monthly drop in more than 6 years. The stock markets are at their highest point in history. The borders are the most secure in the country's history. 0 illegal immigrants in the last 14 months, and murders are at their lowest level since 1900. That's 126 years. And here foreign policy is summed up in one phrase as well, but what a phrase, quote, "We won in Venezuela, which is now working with us and producing millions and millions of barrels of oil. We're winning big in Iran as well. You will see the fruits of this labor very soon."
We also won in Iran, and you will see the fruits of this labor very soon.
Well, remember this very soon about Iran, because in light of everything we discussed in previous episodes about the Hormuz Strait, it sounds like another announcement. And in the next episode on this YouTube channel, we will analyze the current situation in the Middle East. Well then, Trump made the transition, which was basically the whole point of all this. Let me say in advance that this whole speech, this entire address, was just another campaign stunt by the American president to promote the Republican Party in the midterm elections. Here's a quote. "America is back, but we still face a serious challenge that requires urgent action, because no country can be great without fair elections. No trust, no greatness." And then he went on for almost 20 minutes about how the election was stolen from him and what to do to prevent it from happening again. Well, this time there was finally at least some specifics. Now for the main point. Trump announced the immediate declassification of intelligence documents. According to him, they reveal shocking vulnerabilities in the US election infrastructure, which he still can't change through the courts and Congress. Quote, "It is just as outrageous that this vital information has been hidden and kept from you, the American people, for years. But all of that is changing right now." The documents, covering the period from January 2020 to June 2026, have been posted, by the way, as 4 different packages on the White House website. If you want to look at them, you can go to the White House website yourself. They are currently posted on the main page. All these documents, you can check them out. And these documents contain the real bombshell. Trump read out a direct quote from the assessment of the United States intelligence community. And just listen to this. "We believe that adversaries of the United States of America, including at least Russia, China, Iran, North Korea, as well as non-state groups, have the capability to compromise the US election infrastructure." End of quote.
The United States adversaries, including at a minimum Russia, China, Iran, North Korea, as well as non-state groups, have the capability to compromise US election infrastructure.
Well, if I'm not mistaken, this is the first time Donald Trump has called Russia an adversary of the United States. Trump avoided calling Russia an adversary for years. He called Vladimir Putin smart, strong, talked about great relations, and so on. And last night, he himself read out to the nation a document where Russia is listed first among the enemies of American diplomacy. Yes, technically, it's a quote from an intelligence assessment, not his own words, but he chose to voice it during prime time. And then the document he read continues. "We assess that centralized repositories of voter data, voter registration databases, voter rolls, and official election websites are the most vulnerable to exploitation. And adversaries may use access to these systems to disrupt electoral processes in the United States of America." Now the China segment, the top story. Trump stated, quote, "The People's Republic of China carried out what is considered the largest compromise of electoral data in history, resulting in China illegally obtaining 220 million files of American voters. The files contain names, addresses, phone numbers, party preferences, and other sensitive data needed for voter registration and other nefarious activities. And that's exactly what was happening. Intelligence even shows that China dedicated a special data exploitation unit specifically for this new project. Next, about Beijing's motives, and here Trump again reads documents from the Central Intelligence Agency. Quote, "In mid-2018, the policy of the Communist Party of China was to use all internal and external elements opposed to the US president, that is, Donald Trump, with the goal of reducing votes for the US president and forcing him to resign or preventing his re-election. The Chinese government sought to identify American journalists who wrote negatively about the US president and pay them large sums of money to write even more negative articles. The reason they wanted me to lose is because they knew. I figured them out. I imposed tariffs on them worth billions and billions of dollars, and I built the strongest army in the world."
The government sought to identify American journalists who wrote negatively about the president and pay them large sums of money to write even more negative articles about him, as much as they could, and they didn't like what they said.
Well, as a journalist, I have a perfectly logical question here. If Trump has documents in his possession that clearly state that the Chinese bribed specific journalists to write paid-for articles, then why not name those very journalists? If this information exists, just reveal it, show it to the public so that people can decide whether to trust these journalists or not. Show it! Show some lawsuits in court that say, for example, a journalist was bribed and wrote those articles. We won't hear about this. We've heard it and most likely won't hear anything else, because Trump has been using this tactic for years. This is his tactic, unfortunately. Fake news, and that's it. That's the only argument that comes from Donald Trump's mouth. Later, Trump himself stated that the intelligence data still hasn't been properly processed but it already showed that China's actions supposedly even included attempts to produce illegal ballots for, who do you think? Of course, Joe Biden. Supposedly, it was the Chinese who were lobbying and promoting Joe Biden's campaign for president, while his, meaning Trump's, was being undermined. But, as is often the case with Donald Trump, he didn't declare war on China or Russia, but on his own intelligence agencies. You would think that you've uncovered an entire scheme of how China got hold of data on more than 200 million of your voters, rigged the election, bribed journalists, and made it so that Joe Biden won. And instead of declaring war on China for this, he says, no, I'm declaring war on my own intelligence agencies. According to him, American intelligence. Found out about the data breach back in 2020, but did nothing about it. Next is a quote from Trump. Those who were supposed to sound the alarm instead kept the information secret. They didn't inform me, as the president, anyone else, and as far as we know, they didn't even inform Congress. All they kept repeating was that these were the safest elections in our country's history, a standard talking point. Moreover, Trump stated that one email among intelligence analysts admitted that they, and I quote, deliberately edited the president's daily brief to hide information about Chinese activity related to the elections. Another official inside the FBI wrote that she was running, and I quote, a shadow government so that intelligence about Chinese interference would never become known to Donald Trump. And to make sure voters fully believed this whole theory and went to vote specifically for Republicans in the midterm congressional elections in November, Trump added a sinister detail. Here is the quote. Recently, we discovered a significant number of burn bags. Burn bags are bags with documents that were handed over for destruction by President Barack Hussein Obama. These bags were supposed to be burned, but that never happened. We believe this was done. Not intentionally, but because of the gross incompetence of the people who were supposed to burn them. Maybe we got lucky, but the findings are staggering. So, according to Donald Trump, the compromising evidence of the conspiracy survived only because someone was too lazy to burn these bags of documents. But what exactly this compromising evidence is, what was in those bags, Trump doesn't know yet because the bags haven't been sorted through. Well, at least that's how he tried to get his point across. He says, Obama handed over the bags of documents to be burned. They weren't burned. There are supposedly some super secret documents there, but as for which ones exactly, of course, we won't tell you. As a result, Trump instructed the Office of the Director of National Intelligence, the Department of Justice, the FBI, and the CIA to investigate how and why such crucial information was concealed. He also ordered those involved in concealing the documents to be fired and, if appropriate, to bring criminal charges against these people. Then Donald Trump talked a lot about how they found some vulnerabilities in the voting machines and that there were many foreigners among the voters who somehow voted for Joe Biden. And he complained that after voting, it takes too long to count the votes. Of course, the media also got criticized because NBC and ABC News refused to broadcast Trump's speech. Trump's reaction was as follows, quote, they knew what it was about, and they don't like the topic because they know how corrupt our system is. They and others in the media are part of the conspiracy. Such fraud should mean their licenses are revoked. And the final note is the demand for Congress to pass the so-called Save America Act. This is a bill that requires, remember this, photo ID for all voters, proof of citizenship, a complete ban on mail-in voting except in cases of illness, disability, military service, and business trips. And finally, Trump finally revealed the real reason for his speech. I quote, I ask every American, pick up the phone, call your representatives in the House and Senate, and demand that they pass the Save America Act without delay. So that was the whole point. Trump is using his position to promote a bill that will help his party win elections. Well, now my favorite part of any episode is the analysis and fact check. First and foremost, Trump's accusation that China interfered directly contradicts the official US intelligence assessment from March 2021, which concluded with high probability that China did not attempt to influence the outcome of the elections and did not interfere with the electoral infrastructure, including vote counting. And here's the most interesting detail. That assessment from March 2021 was prepared when the Director of National Intelligence was John Radcliffe. This is the current head of the U.S. Central Intelligence Agency, appointed by Donald Trump himself. Senator Warner, the vice chairman of the Intelligence Committee, responded as follows, and I quote, "Oidi. Trump's shocking bombshells about China are complete nonsense. The fact is, our own intelligence agencies unanimously agreed. China didn't even try to change anything. Not a single vote in the 2020 election was changed. Second, simple arithmetic. In 2020, there were almost 214 million registered voters in the US. Trump talks about the theft of 220 million files. That is more than the total number of voters that even existed. Third, China did get the data, but the voter data that China received was not secret at all. These are voter files that, let me tell you a big secret, are routinely purchased by political consultants and strategists, and it's simply impossible to manipulate votes through them. Moreover, each party knows the profile of its voter precisely because of these files. Fourth, well, the most awkward part. The published documents themselves in some places contradict Donald Trump's speech. One of them states that large-scale manipulation of counting systems would be difficult to carry out without being detected. That is, even if it happened, it should have been discovered immediately. Well, and the CIA document directly states, Beijing currently does not intend to secretly interfere in order to influence the outcome of the elections. And one more thing, even within the White House, some officials were concerned before the speech that publishing Chinese materials could be misleading. So, once again, not a single piece of evidence, not even one actually falsified vote. Again, Trump, made a bunch of vague accusations, but once again there were zero specifics. Now, the conclusions? What does all this mean for all of us? For the United States of America, this is the start of the election campaign for the November midterm elections. That's obvious. Donald Trump's speech is a battering ram to push through the Save America Act bill and at the same time an insurance policy. If the Republicans lose in the November elections, Trump will immediately say, "I warned you, China helped the Democrats again. Remember, I told you? Well, here you go. Here's the result. The Republicans lost." Plus, a purge of the intelligence agencies has been announced with criminal cases. This is Trump deepening his war with his own intelligence apparatus. Since his first term, it's been known that he would rather believe the Russians than his own intelligence. There's a paradox here for China. On the one hand, there's a public accusation of the biggest data theft from voters in history. And as Trump stated, the production of ballots. The Chinese embassy responded through its official spokesperson, Liu Chang. And he stated China has never interfered and will never interfere in the US presidential elections. On the other hand, Trump, mind you, is planning a meeting with Xi Jinping in September about trade. And where will this meeting take place? In the United States of America. So, in other words, this speech is also a negotiating tool before the summit, before the meeting. But there's also some embarrassing context for Donald Trump. A recent poll. Pew Research showed that around the world, people now have a better attitude toward China and Xi Jinping than toward the US and Donald Trump. Perhaps this also fueled Donald Trump's rage. And by the way, detailed information about this rating is available on my Telegram channel, Pechi News. The link is in this video's description. Check it out and subscribe. For Russia, this is a quiet but very important change. For the first time in a long time, Trump himself cited a document where Russia is named as the United States of America's #1 adversary on the list. For the Kremlin, which built its entire strategy on a special relationship with Trump, this is a worrying sign. And this fits exactly with the trend we've been talking about for several episodes now. By the way, Lindsey Graham's sanctions today have already received 60 votes in the Senate. That means they will definitely pass. Plus, there's a license to produce Patriot systems for Ukraine. And also, as you remember, on July 8, Trump never called Vladimir Putin and ended up canceling the call. For Ukraine, this is an indirect but real advantage. The more Washington officially identifies Russia and China as adversaries, the stronger the logic of supporting Kyiv becomes, and the harder it is for any lobbyist to reverse it. However, there is also a risk. If America gets bogged down for months in a war with its own intelligence services and in an election scandal, there will be less attention and fewer resources for foreign fronts. And for Europe, the signal here is mixed. The good news is that the US officially names Russia and China as threats, as adversaries. This is the language Europe has been speaking for a long time. The bad news is that the country that guarantees Western security is entering another election cycle. This doesn't make the ally any more stable. So, for Europe, this is yet another reminder. It needs to rearm and strengthen its own footing much faster. In general, Trump once again gave us a campaign speech. He vaguely accused China this time, saying they interfered in the elections and didn't let him win in the previous election cycle. But once again, we basically didn't hear any specifics. So it's just another accusation. It's like if I just accused my neighbor of something and said, I really have evidence that he did it. What evidence? I won't tell you. I'll leave it at that. Share your opinions and conclusions in the comments below this episode. Subscribe to the channel, hit the bell, and don't forget to like. That's all for now. Take care of yourselves. Goodbye, everyone.